The scent of beeswax polish and the faint, metallic tang of silver always calmed me. My workshop, tucked into the converted sunroom of our house, was my sanctuary. At 45, I wasn't just polishing silver, I was polishing dreams I'd deferred for years. Eleanor Vance Designs wasn't just a name on a business card, it was the quiet hum of purpose that had finally started to resonate within me. Bent over a delicate filigree earring, soldering iron steady in my hand, I felt a flicker of the girl I used to be. The one who saw beauty in raw materials, the one who believed creation was a kind of magic. Mark found me there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. His presence lately felt less like a comforting anchor and more like a looming shadow. "Still playing with your trinkets, Ellie?" he asked, the endearment soured by the condescending tone he'd perfected over 20 years of marriage. I didn't look up. "It's called working, Mark. Building a business." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "A business? Honey, let's be realistic. You're 45. Isn't it a bit late in the game to be starting something new? Most people are thinking about winding down, not launching, hobbies." His words were meant to sting, and they did, burrowing under my skin like tiny shards of glass. Too old. The phrase echoed the quiet doubts I fought daily, the societal whispers that told women of a certain age to fade gracefully into the background. But this wasn't just a hobby. It was the culmination of years of sketching designs on napkins, taking night classes in gemology, meticulously saving scraps of money from household budgets. It was the future I was trying to build, piece by painstaking piece. "It's not a hobby, Mark," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "And age has nothing to do with ambition." He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his still thick hair, a gesture meant to convey weary patience. "Look, I just don't want to see you disappointed. Or worse, dipping into our real savings for this venture." The emphasis on real was another subtle dig. He never understood my insistence on keeping meticulous records, maintaining separate accounts for the business, incorporating under my name only. He called it obsessive, paranoid even. "Why complicate things, Ellie?" he'd asked countless times. Now, a cold dread began to seep into my veins, a premonition I couldn't quite name. The confrontation I'd been subconsciously avoiding arrived a week later. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, devastating pronouncement over dinner. He wasn't happy. He hadn't been for a long time. He'd met someone, his secretary, naturally, 26, vibrant, and apparently not too old for anything. He spoke of needing excitement, a fresh start, a life less cluttered. Cluttered with what? A wife building her dream? A shared history? He was leaving, and he was taking half of our savings, the savings he now deemed very real indeed. The room tilted. The life I knew fractured, the pieces scattering like dropped beads. As he stood to leave, suitcase already packed and waiting by the door, he paused. "Honestly, Ellie," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, "focus on your little jewelry thing. Maybe it'll keep you busy." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me in the echoing silence, the smell of beeswax suddenly cloying, the silver glinting like tears I hadn't yet shed. His parting words hung in the air, a final, dismissive blow. He thought my dream was just something to keep an old woman busy. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. The days immediately following Mark's departure were a blur of numb disbelief and sharp, stabbing pain. The house felt cavernous, every echo amplifying my solitude. Friends offered condolences, their words like soft gauze on a gaping wound, well-intentioned, but ultimately inadequate. The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the casual cruelty of his dismissal, the years of subtle undermining that now felt like a calculated erosion of my self-worth. He hadn't just left me, he tried to dismantle the very foundation of my burgeoning identity. Then came the lawyers, the division of assets. Mark, represented by a slick downtown firm, was efficient and ruthless. He wanted his half, precisely calculated, conveniently forgetting the years I'd managed the household finances, stretched budgets, and enabled his career advancements while my own aspirations simmered on the back burner. He took the money from the joint accounts, the investments I'd carefully researched, leaving me with the house, the mortgage, and a future that felt terrifyingly uncertain. He probably imagined me crumbling, selling the house, perhaps moving in with my sister. He underestimated me. He always had. It was during a bleak afternoon, sorting through financial statements with my own, far less expensive lawyer, that a different kind of spark ignited within the ashes of my grief. We were reviewing the accounts Mark had access to, the ones he'd systematically drained, but then we turned to my accounts, the ones meticulously separated for Eleanor Vance Designs. The incorporation papers, filed solely in my name. The business bank accounts, requiring only my signature. The detailed ledgers tracking every expense, every sale, every ounce of silver purchased. Mark's mockery echoed in my mind. Obsessive, paranoid. Now, that obsession was my shield, my lifeboat. He can't touch this, my lawyer confirmed, tapping the pristine business statements. This is yours, Eleanor. Untouchable. A fierce protective surge coursed through me. This wasn't just a hobby, it was my territory, my creation, and I had, perhaps subconsciously, fortified its borders. The pain didn't vanish, but it shifted. It became fuel. The humiliation, the dismissal, the sheer injustice of it all, I wouldn't let it drown me. I would channel it. Every condescending remark, every dismissive chuckle, every time he called my passion a little hobby, would become a brick in the new foundation I would build. That night, I didn't cry. I went into my workshop. The scent of beeswax and metal no longer felt cloying. It smelled like resilience. I picked up my tools, the familiar weight grounding me. I sketched new designs, bolder, more intricate than before. The pain was still there, a deep thrum beneath the surface, but now it had a purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving him wrong, proving myself right. I remembered a small, independent boutique owner I'd met at a craft fair months ago. She'd loved a specific silver cuff I'd made, intricate with tiny, hidden étoiles, stars. She'd given me her card, urged me to call if I ever made more. On impulse, fueled by this new, sharp resolve, I found her card and sent her an email attaching photos of the cuff and 2 new, complementary pieces I'd just designed. It was a small step, a tiny ember in the darkness. Days later, an email notification pinged. It was the boutique owner. Her message was short, electrifying. "These are stunning, Eleanor. Can you make 6 more? Immediately?" That first real order felt like oxygen rushing into starved lungs. 6 pieces. It wasn't a fortune, but it was validation. It was proof that someone saw value in what Mark had dismissed as mere trinkets. I threw myself into the work with a ferocity that surprised even me. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. The workshop became my world, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of my hammer a counterpoint to the frantic beat of my own heart. I sourced stones with renewed focus, haggled with suppliers, refined my techniques. Every finished piece felt like a small victory against the ghost of Mark's condescension. The boutique owner, Celeste, became an early champion. She displayed my pieces prominently, talked them up to her discerning clientele. Soon, she needed more. Then, customers started asking for custom work, commissions based on my designs. Word began to spread through the small, interconnected world of independent fashion boutiques. My little hobby was demanding more time, more resources, more of me than I ever anticipated. The initial trickle of income became a steady stream, enough to cover the mortgage Mark had left me with, enough to reinvest, enough to breathe a little easier. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. A batch of silver turned out to be substandard, forcing me to remake an entire order at my own expense. A potential collaboration fell through at the last minute. There were lonely nights when the sheer weight of running everything myself felt overwhelming, when the temptation to just crawl into bed and mourn the life I'd lost was almost unbearable. But then I'd remember Mark's parting words, the smug certainty in his eyes. Maybe it'll keep you busy. That memory was like flint striking steel, reigniting my resolve. I wasn't just busy, I was building. I learned to navigate the business side, marketing, rudimentary accounting, customer relations. I built a simple website, showcasing my designs with photos I learned to take myself, using natural light and carefully chosen props. I started attending higher-end craft fairs and artisan markets, not just locally, but regionally. It was exhausting, loading and unloading displays, standing on my feet for hours, smiling until my face ached. But the direct feedback, the glint of appreciation in a customer's eyes as they tried on a necklace, the quiet satisfaction of a sale made through genuine connection, it was intoxicating. One sweltering afternoon at an outdoor market in a neighboring state, a woman approached my booth. She was impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of quiet authority. She didn't browse idly. She examined each piece with a focused intensity, asking sharp, insightful questions about my process, my materials, my inspiration. She introduced herself as Amelia Sterling, a senior buyer for Viridian Luxe, a high-end retailer known for discovering unique designers. My heart hammered against my ribs. Viridian Luxe was leagues beyond the small boutiques I currently supplied. They had stores in major cities, a glossy catalog, a reputation for launching careers. Amelia spent nearly an hour at my booth, eventually selecting 3 distinct pieces. As she paid, she handed me her card. "Your work has a unique voice, Eleanor," she said, her gaze direct. "It's elegant, but there's a strength to it. Send me your lookbook. I'd like to see the full collection." Holding her card, the embossed Viridian Luxe logo feeling impossibly heavy in my hand, I felt a tremor of something more than hope. It felt like destiny knocking, but could I possibly be ready to answer the door to something this big? Creating a professional lookbook felt like preparing for a royal audience. I hired a local photographer, a young woman with a fantastic eye, and together we spent days capturing the essence of my work. The interplay of light on metal, the subtle fire within the stones, the blend of delicacy and strength Amelia Sterling had noticed. Sending that digital file off to Viridian Luxe was an act of sheer audacity, a leap of faith into an unknown, far more competitive world. I tried to temper my expectations, reminding myself of the countless talented designers vying for such opportunities. Weeks passed. The silence from Viridian Luxe was deafening. I continued fulfilling orders for my existing boutiques, working on commissions, trying desperately not to pin all my hopes on Amelia's interest. Doubt, that old, unwelcome companion, began to creep back in. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I was aiming too high, reaching beyond my grasp. Maybe this was the ceiling for my little hobby. Then the email arrived. It wasn't a rejection, it was an invitation. Amelia Sterling wanted to meet, to discuss a potential capsule collection for Viridian Luxe's upcoming season. The meeting took place in their sleek, minimalist corporate headquarters, a world away from my cluttered sunroom workshop. I wore one of my own necklaces, a silver pendant designed to look like a shield, subtly textured, feeling like I needed its symbolic protection. Amelia was direct, professional, but also encouraging. She saw potential, a niche my designs could fill. The negotiation was intense but fair. They wanted exclusivity on certain designs, a commitment to production timelines. I wasn't sure I could meet alone, but the opportunity was staggering. I signed the contract, my hand trembling slightly. The Viridian Luxe launch was a whirlwind. Suddenly, Eleanor Vance Designs wasn't just me in my workshop. It was a brand featured in their glossy catalogs, displayed under sophisticated lighting in their elegant stores in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My designs, particularly the pieces that subtly conveyed resilience and inner strength, resonated with their clientele. Fashion bloggers mentioned my work. An editor from a major style magazine requested pieces for a photo shoot. My website traffic exploded. Orders poured in, far exceeding my capacity to produce everything by hand. The success was exhilarating but terrifying. I was drowning in orders, working 18-hour days, the joy of creation overshadowed by the pressure of production. I realized I couldn't do it alone anymore. I needed help. Not just assistance, but strategic partners. I hired my first employee, a talented young metalsmith, then another. I needed someone to manage the finances, the logistics, the growth. Through a business network connection, I was introduced to Clara Hayes, a seasoned CFO with a reputation for scaling artisan businesses into profitable enterprises. Clara was sharp, experienced, and saw the potential in Eleanor Vance Designs that even I was sometimes too overwhelmed to fully grasp. She wasn't intimidated by the Viridian Lux contract. She saw it as a stepping stone. Around this time, snippets of news about Mark began to filter through mutual acquaintances. His relationship with the young secretary had imploded spectacularly, ending in workplace drama and accusations. He'd lost his management position shortly after. He was still working, but lower down the ladder, at a mid-sized jewelry distributor called GemSource, a company known more for its volume than its vision. Hearing about his struggles didn't bring the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, it felt distant. His life seemed small and messy, while mine was expanding in ways I'd never imagined. One afternoon, reviewing quarterly reports, Clara looked up from a spreadsheet, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Eleanor," she said slowly, "I've been analyzing market opportunities, potential acquisitions for strategic growth. There's a distributor, struggling a bit but with decent infrastructure. GemSource. Does that name mean anything to you?" GemSource. The name hung in the air between us, thick with unspoken history. My breath caught. Clara, perceptive as ever, noticed my reaction. "I take it that's a yes?" she asked gently. I nodded, explaining briefly, clinically, that my ex-husband worked there. I omitted the bitterness, the too old comments, the raw wound of the betrayal. This was business. Clara processed the information, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then her focus sharpened. "Okay," she said, "all business again. Personal history aside, from a purely strategic standpoint, acquiring GemSource could solve several of our logistical bottlenecks. Their distribution network is established, if underutilized. Their supplier contracts could be beneficial if renegotiated. They're financially vulnerable, likely receptive to an offer." The idea was audacious, almost unthinkable. Buying the company where Mark now worked? The irony was staggering. Part of me recoiled. It felt too pointed, too personal. Was this revenge masquerading as strategy? But another part, the businesswoman I was becoming, recognized the cold logic in Clara's assessment. Eleanor Vance Designs was growing exponentially. We'd moved out of my sunroom into a proper studio space. We had a small team. We'd opened a flagship boutique in a trendy downtown district, followed quickly by 2 more in other cities after the Viridian Lux success fueled demand. We were outgrowing our grassroots origins. Acquiring GemSource, absorbing their infrastructure, could catapult us to the next level, streamlining production and distribution, allowing us to scale efficiently. We spent weeks analyzing GemSource's financials, their market position, their weaknesses. Clara's due diligence was exhaustive. The picture that emerged was one of a company coasting on past glories, mismanaged, slow to adapt, and bleeding cash. Mark's presence there was a footnote in the larger strategic analysis, yet it remained a persistent hum in the back of my mind. Could I really do this? Could I walk into that company as its new owner, knowing he was there? The decision wasn't made lightly. I wrestled with it, examining my motives. Yes, there was a certain grim satisfaction in the thought of turning the tables so completely. But it wasn't just about Mark. It was about securing the future of the company I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into. It was about honoring the ambition he had tried to extinguish. It was about proving, perhaps mostly to myself, that I wasn't too old for anything. This acquisition wasn't just revenge, it was the ultimate validation of my resurgence. It was a sound business move, amplified by a twist of fate that felt almost poetic. "Let's proceed," I told Clara, my voice firm. "Prepare the offer." The process moved swiftly. Clara, a master negotiator, handled the initial outreach through investment bankers, keeping Eleanor Vance Designs anonymous at first. GemSource's board, facing mounting pressure from creditors, was more receptive than we even anticipated. They were looking for a lifeline, and our offer, while carefully calculated, represented exactly that. The negotiations were complex, involving layers of financial structuring and legal maneuvering. Throughout it all, I remained focused, compartmentalizing the personal element, channeling the cool-headed strategist Clara was helping me become. Mark was an employee in a company we were evaluating. Nothing more, nothing less. Or so I told myself. The final stages of negotiation were tense. GemSource's board requested one last meeting to review the definitive agreement. Our lawyers were confident, but until the ink was dry, anything could happen. Clara received a call late on a Friday afternoon. She walked into my office, closed the door, and met my gaze across the desk. "They're convening Monday morning to vote," she said. "It looks promising, Eleanor. Very promising." That weekend was the longest of my life. The knowledge that GemSource's board was meeting Monday morning to decide the fate of our offer, and tangentially the next chapter of my own narrative, hung over me like a storm cloud. I tried to distract myself, sketching new designs, visiting one of our boutiques, even attempting to read a novel. But my mind kept circling back to GemSource, to the sterile boardroom where men, and likely they were mostly men, would hold the future of my company's expansion and Mark's employment in their hands. Was it wrong to feel a thrill alongside the anxiety? A sense of impending, almost karmic justice? I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the strategic advantages. Clara and I had spent hours mapping out the integration plan, which GemSource departments would be streamlined, which supplier contracts renegotiated, how their distribution network would merge with our burgeoning e-commerce operations. It was a complex puzzle, and the prospect of solving it was genuinely exciting from a business perspective. Yet, beneath the strategic calculations, the image of Mark's face when he learned the identity of the new owner flickered persistently. I thought back to those early days after he left, the crushing weight of his dismissal, the feeling of being discarded. Too old? A little hobby? The words had been meant to diminish me, to confine me to a small, inconsequential existence. He had underestimated my pain, underestimated my resilience, and most of all, underestimated my ambition. He saw a middle-aged woman playing with beads. He failed to see the businesswoman waiting to be forged in the fires of betrayal. On Monday morning, I was in the studio before dawn. The hum of the polishing machine, the clink of tools, these were the sounds of my real life now, the tangible results of my work. I refused to sit by the phone. Clara had promised to call the moment she heard anything. I immersed myself in selecting stones for a new collection, the cool smoothness of turquoise and the deep fire of garnet grounding me in the present. The hours crawled by. 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Each chime of the clock felt like a hammer blow against my nerves. Doubts surfaced again. What if they rejected the offer? What if another buyer emerged? What if this whole audacious plan collapsed? Just before noon, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the screen for a second before answering. "Eleanor?" Clara's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of excitement. The board voted, unanimously. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the edge of my workbench. "And?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "And?" Clara continued, a smile evident in her tone. "As of the closing date next week, Eleanor Vance Designs will be the proud new owner of GemSource Distributors." Relief flooded through me, so potent it felt like weakness. It was done. The strategy was sound, the negotiation successful. The acquisition was happening. But tangled within the relief was that undeniable, sharp thread of vindication. The company that employed the man who told me I was too old to start a business was about to become mine. Clara finalized the call, discussing the immediate next steps: press releases, internal communications, the logistics of the transition day. The current CEO has requested you be there for the announcement to their senior staff next Tuesday, she relayed. He thinks it will smooth the transition. Tuesday, announcement day. The day I would walk into GemSource headquarters, not as Mark's dismissed wife, but as the new owner. The week leading up to the GemSource announcement felt surreal. Clara and her team worked tirelessly on the integration plan, legal teams finalized the paperwork, and a carefully worded press release was drafted, ready to go. I focused on my own preparations, selecting my outfit with deliberate care. A sharply tailored navy pantsuit, understated yet commanding, accessorized, of course, with a signature Eleanor Vance Designs necklace, a piece featuring a single, luminous pearl protected by overlapping silver wings. It felt appropriate. Sleep was fitful the night before. Images flashed through my mind. Mark's face contorted in surprise, the GemSource logo being replaced by mine, the satisfaction of finally, definitively proving him wrong. But there were other images too, the pain in his eyes the day he left, the shared history we couldn't entirely erase, a fleeting, uncomfortable flicker of pity. I pushed it down. This wasn't about pity. It was about claiming my power, the power he tried to deny I possessed. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear. Clara picked me up, her calm presence a welcome anchor. As we drove towards the GemSource headquarters, a bland corporate building I'd only ever seen from the outside, my stomach churned. "Ready?" Clara asked, glancing over. I nodded, taking a slow, deliberate breath. As I'll ever be. Walking into the lobby felt like stepping onto a stage. The air crackled with nervous energy. Employees whispered amongst themselves, casting curious glances towards the elevators. The outgoing CEO, a man named Henderson with a forced smile and weary eyes, met us near the reception desk. He greeted me with professional courtesy, though I sensed his relief at handing over the reins of his struggling company. "Ms. Vance, welcome. We appreciate you coming today. The senior team is gathered in the main conference room." We rode the elevator up in silence. Henderson made small talk about the weather. I offered polite, non-committal responses. My focus was inward, steeling myself, drawing on the resilience I'd cultivated over the past 5 years. The woman who had wept in her workshop after Mark left felt like a distant memory, a faded photograph. The woman standing in this elevator was the CEO of a thriving company, about to execute a major strategic acquisition. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Polished floors, generic corporate art, the low hum of office life. Henderson led us down a carpeted hallway towards a large conference room with glass walls. Through the glass, I could see about a dozen people seated around a long table, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. And then I saw him, Mark. Seated near the far end of the table, looking older, thinner, his posture slumped. He wasn't senior management, clearly, but likely a department head or senior associate deemed important enough, or perhaps just unlucky enough, to be included in this initial announcement meeting. He hadn't seen me yet. He was staring down at a notepad, doodling distractedly. My heart gave a painful lurch, a complex mix of vindication, residual pain, and a strange, detached sense of finality. This was it, the moment the past and the present collided. Henderson paused at the conference room door, turning to me. "Shall we?" he asked. I smoothed my jacket, lifted my chin, and met his gaze. "Let's begin." He opened the door, and we stepped inside. All eyes turned towards us. And then Mark looked up. Time seemed to slow down. As Henderson introduced me, the principal of the acquiring company, Miss Eleanor Vance. Mark's head snapped up. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then dawning horror. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly much older than his years. He froze, his pen clattering onto the table, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. Our eyes met across the expanse of polished wood. In that instant, I saw not just shock, but the shattering of his reality, the complete, disorienting inversion of the narrative he'd constructed about his life and mine. I held his gaze for a beat, my expression carefully neutral, professional. Then I turned my attention to the rest of the room, nodding politely as Henderson finished his brief, awkward introduction. I stepped forward, taking my place at the head of the table. Clara stood unobtrusively beside me, radiating quiet competence. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the complex emotions swirling beneath the surface. "I am Eleanor Vance, founder and CEO of Eleanor Vance Designs. As you know, we have finalized the acquisition of Gem Source Distributors, effective immediately." I spoke for several minutes, outlining our vision for the company, emphasizing growth, innovation, and a renewed focus on quality and strategic partnerships. I spoke of leveraging GemSource's infrastructure while infusing it with the dynamism and design focus that had made my own company successful. I kept my tone positive, forward-looking. I could feel Mark's eyes on me the entire time, a burning, incredulous stare. I didn't look directly at him again until I began discussing the immediate future. As with any acquisition of this nature, I continued, my gaze sweeping the room before landing, deliberately, on him, there will be some restructuring to eliminate redundancies and streamline operations. We value efficiency and a clear strategic direction. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Clara Hayes, my CFO, and our transition team will be meeting with department heads individually over the coming days. Then, the final, necessary cut. However, some decisions have already been made based on our initial assessment. I looked directly at Mark now. His face was ashen. "Mark," I said, using his name for the first time, my voice calm, devoid of malice but utterly firm. "Your position, unfortunately, has been deemed redundant under the new structure. Your direct supervisor will meet with you shortly to discuss the details of your severance package. Security will escort you afterwards." A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the room. Mark stared at me, speechless, his mouth slightly agape. He looked utterly broken. A younger version of me might have felt a pang of guilt, but the woman standing there felt only a quiet, resolute sense of closure. He had sown the wind, now he was reaping the whirlwind. He stammered something incoherent, starting to rise, but a quiet word from the man beside him, likely his supervisor, made him sink back into his chair, defeated. The rest of the meeting proceeded smoothly. Questions were asked and answered. Plans were outlined. When it concluded, I watched from a distance as Mark was quietly spoken to by his supervisor and then escorted out by two uniformed security guards carrying a small cardboard box with his personal effects. He didn't look back. Later that day, back in my own office, the spacious, light-filled office of a successful CEO, I stood before my wall. There, framed, was a copy of the dismissive email Mark had sent me years ago, forwarded from our old joint account before I closed it. The one where he'd scoffed at my little hobby and its chances of success. Right below it hung our company's latest award, Innovation in Jewelry Design from a prestigious industry association. The contrast was stark, satisfying. He said I was too old. He said it was just a hobby. He tried to diminish my dream, take my confidence along with half our savings, but he hadn't broken me. He had, inadvertently, fueled me. He had underestimated the quiet strength within, the resilience forged in the heart of a woman reclaiming her life, piece by precious piece. My success wasn't just about the business, it was about the rebuilding of Eleanor Vance, not as Mark's discarded wife, but as the architect of her own destiny. And as I looked at the award, then at the framed email, I didn't feel anger anymore, just a profound, quiet sense of peace. I had won.